A Werewolf Shifter Romance written by Catherine Stewart. Prologue. The biting wind of the high crags whipped at young Elara's cloak, a stark contrast to the usually sheltered paths of the Moonclaw territory. Her grandmother, Elder Lyra, her hand a surprisingly strong grip on Elara's smaller one, led her towards a fissure in the mountainside, a place whispered about in hushed, fearful tones, a place never approached. The air grew colder, unnaturally still, as they descended into the narrow passage. The scent of damp earth, and something else, something metallic, faintly rotten, like old, spoiled magic, pricked Elara's nostrils. Lyra, her face etched with a gravity Elara had never witnessed, spoke in low tones, solemnly, of a time before memory, of a shadow that fell upon the world, a blight that fed on spirit and life. She spoke of a pact made in desperation by their ancestors, a desperate attempt to contain a sliver of this darkness, believing it could be controlled, only for it to become a festering wound upon their lineage, a secret to be guarded with their lives. They reached a sealed stone door, pulsing with a faint, sickly luminescence. Strange, distorted whispers seemed to emanate from it, coiling around Elara's mind. The ground beneath her thin shoes felt wrong, as if life itself recoiled from this spot. Her grandmother's breath hitched, rasped. "This is the burden of our blood, child." Lyra's voice was a low rasp. "The reason we watch, the reason we must be vigilant." Lyra pressed Elara's small hand against the cold, faintly vibrating stone of the door. A jolt, icy and terrifying, shot up Elara's arm. For a horrifying instant, the whispers intensified, forming a singular, insidious voice. Insidious whisper. Power. Then oblivion. She saw a fleeting, nightmarish vision, life withering to dust, wolves turning, mindless rage, spirits consumed. Lyra pulled her back, sharply. Rasped, urgent. Some powers, her grandmother's eyes burned with a desperate light, are too vast, too volatile. They call to the shadow. Any great surge of untamed spirit, it could crack the seals, it could feed the blight. You must swear, Elara, swear to protect this pack, to guard this secret, to never allow such a catalyst to emerge. Swear it, on your very soul. Tears streaming, the icy touch seared into her memory. Young Elara swore the oath. The weight of it settled upon her, a physical burden, stealing the last of her childhood. Decades later. Elara, now an elder herself, stood on a precipice overlooking the Moonclaw Valley. Her eyes, though aged, held the same haunted vigilance from that day in the fissure. The wind whipped her silvered hair, but she didn't shiver. The memory of the cold stone, the insidious whispers, a constant companion. Her gaze swept over the familiar landscape, settling on the vibrant life below. But what she truly saw was the ever-present shadow lurking just beyond the veil. The Blight. Her ancestor had foolishly sought to bargain with it. And with the upcoming union of their new alpha, Roric, her gaze sharpened, a new, specific unease coiling in her gut. She thought of the girl, Seraphina. There was a brightness to the girl, an untamed spiritual resonance. It reminded Elara too much of the uncontrolled surges her grandmother had warned against. The vow, made in terror so long ago, echoed in her mind. Potent, binding. As ever, the blight must remain contained. Firmly, chillingly. At any cost. Optimized. Prologue. Script. Clean version. The biting wind of the high crags whipped at young Elara's cloak, a stark contrast to the usually sheltered paths of the Moonclaw territory. Her grandmother, Elder Lyra, her hand a surprisingly strong grip on Elara's smaller one, led her towards a fissure in the mountainside, a place whispered about in hushed, fearful tones, a place never approached. The air grew colder, unnaturally still, as they descended into the narrow passage. The scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic, faintly rotten, like old spoiled magic, pricked Elara's nostrils. Lyra, her face etched with a gravity Elara had never witnessed, spoke in low tones, of a time before memory, of a shadow that fell upon the world, a blight that fed on spirit and life. She spoke of a pact made in desperation by their ancestors, a desperate attempt to contain a sliver of this darkness, believing it could be controlled, only for it to become a festering wound upon their lineage, a secret, to be guarded with their lives. They reached a sealed stone door, pulsing with a faint, sickly luminescence. Strange, distorted whispers seemed to emanate from it, coiling around Elara's mind. The ground beneath her thin shoes felt wrong, as if life itself recoiled from this spot. Her grandmother's breath hitched. "This is the burden of our blood, child." Lyra's voice was a low rasp. "The reason we watch, the reason we must be vigilant." Lyra pressed Elara's small hand against the cold, faintly vibrating stone of the door. A jolt, icy and terrifying, shot up Elara's arm. For a horrifying instant, the whispers intensified, forming a singular, insidious voice. "Power! Then oblivion!" She saw a fleeting, nightmarish vision. Life withering to dust. Wolves turning, mindless rage, spirits consumed. Lyra pulled her back, sharply. "Some powers," her grandmother's eyes burned with a desperate light, "are too vast, too volatile. They call to the shadow, any great surge of untamed spirit. It could crack the seals, it could feed the blight. You must swear, Elara, swear to protect this pack, to guard this secret, to never allow such a catalyst to emerge. Swear it, on your very soul." Tears streaming. The icy touch seared into her memory. Young Elara swore the oath. The weight of it settled upon her, a physical burden, stealing the last of her childhood. Decades later, Elara, now an elder herself, stood on a precipice overlooking the Moonclaw Valley. Her eyes, though aged, held the same haunted vigilance from that day in the fissure. The wind whipped her silvered hair, but she didn't shiver. The memory of the cold stone, the insidious whispers, a constant companion. Her gaze swept over the familiar landscape, settling on the vibrant life below. But what she truly saw was the ever-present shadow lurking just beyond the veil. The Blight. Her ancestor had foolishly sought to bargain with it, and with the upcoming union of their new alpha, Roric, her gaze sharpened, a new specific unease coiling in her gut. She thought of the girl, Seraphina. There was a brightness to the girl, an untamed spiritual resonance. It reminded Elara too much of the uncontrolled surges her grandmother had warned against. The vow made in terror so long ago echoed in her mind, potent, binding, as ever. The blight must remain contained, at any cost. The laughter, like sunshine, warming Seraphina from the inside out. And then, Roric. Her Roric, alpha of the MoonclawPack, his grin wide, eyes the color of wild honey, crinkling at the corners. He was it, her fated mate, the other half of her soul, and their union ceremony, and just days away. Today, though, was for the Sunstone ritual, a blessing for their bond. Maybe it was fate that the clearing they stood in glowed, sunlight dappling the ancient, moss-covered stones like playful sprites. She reached out, her fingers brushing his strong arm. A familiar tingle danced up her skin. He turned, his gaze so warm, it made her toes curl. "Happy, my heart?" Roric's voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder, but full of promise, not threat. Because of that, her own heart did a little flip. Seraphina nodded, her throat suddenly tight with too much happiness. "More than words can say, Roric. It all feels perfect." And then, just like that, her gaze drifted to Elder Elara, watching them from the edge of the clearing. Elara's smile. It didn't quite reach her eyes. Sharp, like a hawk's. An odd little shiver, cold as a winter creek, tiptoed down Seraphina's spine. What was that look for? She didn't know what scared her more, the intensity in Elara's stare, or the sudden feeling that maybe, just maybe, not everyone shared her joy. More importantly, she wanted today to be perfect. So, she pushed the thought away. Next, Elder Lyra, Elara's own contemporary, but with eyes full of genuine warmth, began the ritual chant. Her voice, though old, was strong, weaving words of ancient blessings, of pack, of loyalty, of mates bound under the watchful eyes of the moon goddess. As Lyra chanted, Seraphina felt a strange hum resonate within her. A quiet song. It seemed to answer the elder's call. Without thinking, she reached out and gently adjusted a wilting moon petal on the central offering stone, coaxing it back to life with a touch. A soft gasp rippled through the nearby pack members. Elder Lyra paused, her eyes widening slightly. Then a slow, knowing smile touched her lips. Elara, on the other hand, stiffened. Her gaze now fixed on Seraphina. Unreadable. An expression that wasn't a smile at all. In the quiet that followed, Seraphina wondered, what had she done? Was it wrong? The air thickened, and the joyous hum inside her faltered, replaced by a prickle of unease. This strange sense she sometimes had, this connection to things unseen, it always seemed to make people look at her. Funny. Roric squeezed her hand then, his warmth a welcome reassurance, pulling her attention back to him. But the elder's sharp look lingered in the back of her mind. A tiny shadow. On a golden day. This was supposed to be their happy beginning. Why did a part of her feel like she was standing on the edge of something unknown and vast? From there, the ritual continued. But for Seraphina, a small thread of worry had been woven into the tapestry of her happiness. Her body moved on instinct when Roric pulled her close after the sunstone ritual. His familiar scent of pine and damp earth a comfort she'd known her whole life. Later that afternoon, they walked by the Whispering Falls, a place where secrets were shared between lovers, or so the pack tales went. And then, he stopped, turning her to face him, his honey eyes serious now. "Sera," he began, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, sending those delightful shivers down her spine again. "That thing you did with the moon petal, Elara mentioned it. She said it was unusual." Seraphina's small bloom of happiness wilted. Unusual. How? Her voice, barely a whisper. Deep down, she knew. Her little quirks always made her stand out. Not always. In a good way. Roric sighed. A deep sound. It seemed to carry the weight of his new alpha responsibilities. "She worries, Sera, about anything that might be seen as unpredictable. For the pack, for me." He didn't meet her eyes then. And that scared her more than anything. What was Elara really saying to him? "And you?" Seraphina pressed, needing to know. "Do you think I'm unpredictable, Roric? A risk?" Before he could answer, a young pack scout, barely old enough to have his first shift, skidded to a halt before them, breathless. "Alpha Roric, Elder Elara summons you. Urgent council matter." Roric's jaw tightened. "Yet," he nodded. "I must go." He cupped her face, his gaze searching hers. "This changes nothing between us, my heart. Nothing." But then, as he walked away, his broad shoulders set with a new tension. Seraphina couldn't shake the feeling. Something had already changed. Elder Elara's influence. It was like a creeping vine, wasn't it? Strong, silent, always working its way into the heart of things. The way Roric had hesitated. The careful way he chose his words, because of Elara's concerns. It was a tiny crack. In their perfect world. Not only that, but the scout had said, urgent. What could be so urgent? Just days before their union. Maybe it was fate, this constant intrusion of Elara's anxieties. She didn't know what scared her more, Elara's mysterious disapproval, or the thought that Roric might actually listen to it. As if pulled by a string, her thoughts spun back to the sunstone ritual, to Elara's hawk-like gaze. It wasn't just worry she'd seen there. It was something colder, something that felt almost like calculation. The days leading up to the union ceremony, they should have been filled with pure, unclouded joy. Instead, a subtle tension hummed beneath the surface of the MoonclawPack, a discordant note, in a familiar song. Roric was distant. Still loving? Yes, but preoccupied. His brow, often furrowed when he thought she wasn't looking. And Elara. Well, Elara was everywhere, a constant, silent reminder of unspoken concerns. Seraphina tried to focus on the final fittings of her ceremonial gown, the soft leather feeling like a second skin, a comfort in the swirling uncertainty. Her friends chattered excitedly, their voices a bright counterpoint to the worry coiling in her belly. "You'll be the most beautiful alpha's mate this pack has ever seen, Sarah," Lyra, her best friend, chirped, adjusting a fall of willow leaves woven into Seraphina's hair. Seraphina forced a smile. "Thank you, Lyra. I want everything to be right." "And it will be," Lyra declared, though even her optimism seemed a little strained. "Roric adores you. Everyone knows that." But then, the memory of Roric's hesitation by the falls surfaced. Elara worries. What exactly was Elara telling him? What stories was she spinning? Because of that, Seraphina found it hard to simply bask in the excitement. It felt like walking through a beautiful forest, all sunshine and birdsong, while knowing a storm was gathering, just over the horizon. She found herself watching Elara more closely during pack gatherings. The elder moved with a quiet authority, her words always carefully chosen, always seeming reasonable. Yet, Seraphina couldn't shake the image of that cold calculation in her eyes. It was a chilling contradiction. The respected elder, the wise counselor, and the woman who made Seraphina feel like a threat. What's worse, Roric seemed to be spending more and more time in closed council meetings Elara always attended. Moments later, as Seraphina was admiring the intricate beadwork on her gown, a young wolf approached, his expression somber. "Seraphina," he said, "Alpha Roric requests your presence in his private den." Her heart skipped. His private den. That was unusual, especially now. The joyful chatter of her friends died away. Lyra's hand found hers, giving it a squeeze. "Go on." Lyra tried for reassuring, but her eyes were wide with a question Seraphina couldn't answer. With every heartbeat, a sense of dread grew. Before she could move, her feet felt like lead. The path to Roric's den, usually so familiar and welcoming, suddenly seemed long, shadowed. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. This was all wrong. As the silence stretched, she knew. Deep down, she knew. Whatever waited for her in that den, it was not the joyful anticipation of their union. It was something else, something that felt like an ending. And just like that, everything changed course, pulling her towards a moment she wasn't ready for. The heavy oak door of Roric's den clicked shut behind her. The sound, an echo, like a stone dropped into a deep, dark well. And then, Seraphina turned, to face him. Her heart, a frantic bird trapped in her ribs. Roric stood by the hearth, firelight dancing over his strong features. But his eyes, those beautiful honey eyes that always looked at her with such love, were cold, cold, as the deepest part of the winter river. Her world tilted. "Sarah," he began, his voice empty. "We need to talk." She nodded, her throat too tight for words. What followed was a blur, carefully chosen phrases, each one a hammer blow against her soul. He spoke of the pack, of his duties. As Alpha, he mentioned concerns, instability, the greater good. But then, the words that truly mattered, sliced through the haze. The union ceremony. It cannot happen, Seraphina. Time stood still, her breath caught. What are you saying, Roric? I am saying, he continued, and he couldn't meet her gaze, that I cannot be your mate, that you are not the mate this pack needs, that I need. Each word, a fresh tear, in the fabric of her reality. As if pulled by a string, a single tear escaped her eye, then another. But we're fated, Roric. The moon goddess chose us. You said. Sometimes, he interrupted, his voice harder now. What we think is fate is a mistake, a misinterpretation. His eyes finally flicked to hers, and what she saw there was not love, but a chilling resolve, a resolve that looked terrifyingly like Elara's. Before she could move, he took a step closer. For the good of the pack, Seraphina, and for your own well-being, you must leave Moonclaw territory, tonight, quietly. The air thickened between them, charged with unspoken things. In that moment, as his unspoken rejection fully slammed into her, something inside her shattered. It was more than heartbreak. It was a spiritual agony, a searing, tearing pain that ripped through her core, as if their fated bond, the very essence of her soul's connection to him, was being forcibly, brutally severed. She gasped, clutching her chest, the pain so intense, it stole her breath. Her vision blurred. Roric flinched, a strange look briefly crossing his face. Was it pain? Regret? But then, it was gone, replaced by that cold mask. He had to do this, he told himself, because Elara had shown him the risks, because an alpha must be strong above all else, which meant this was her new reality. Her alpha, her fated mate, had cast her out, and just like that, everything changed. The silence roared in the den, broken only by her ragged breathing, and the echo of his devastating words. As the echo faded, Seraphina stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. He wouldn't even look at her. Not really. Not with the love that had always been her anchor. So this was it. Her Roric, her fated mate, sending her away. And then a cold dread, far deeper than the shock, settled in her bones. She had to leave, not because she wanted to. Oh, goddess, no, but because he, her alpha, had commanded it. Her world, once so bright and so full of promise in Ninden, had shrunk to this one, dark, suffocating point. Why, Roric, she finally managed, the words scraping her throat. Just, why? He turned away then, presenting her with his broad, unyielding back. It is for the best, Seraphina, believe that. His voice, still flat, devoid of the warmth she craved, the warmth that had been stolen from her. Truth be told, she didn't believe it, not for a second. Deep down she knew the truth, or at least a sliver of it. Elara's shadow loomed large over this decision. But what could she do? Argue? Plead? Her wolf, usually a comforting presence, was a wounded thing, cowering inside her, sharing her agony. To make things worse, every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee the source of this unbearable pain. Before she could move, or rather, before her legs completely gave out, she forced herself to nod, a single jerky movement. What else was there? Without another word, she turned. Each step towards the door of the den, like walking through thick, suffocating mud. Her chest ached, with a pressure so intense, she thought her ribs might crack. With every heartbeat, the image of his cold eyes, the finality in his voice, burned deeper into her mind. By the time she reached the door, her vision was swimming with unshed tears. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Because if she did, she knew she would shatter into 1,000,000 pieces, right there on his hearth. That night, the moon, the goddess she'd always prayed to, felt like a distant, uncaring eye in the dark sky. Maybe it was fate, this cruel twist. Or maybe fate was just another word for a pain too big to understand. Her body moved on instinct, one foot in front of the other, carrying her away from everything she had ever known, ever loved. Her name hung in the air behind her, uncalled. And the silence that followed was the sound of her world ending. Come morning, or what she guessed was morning through the thick, disorienting canopy of the deep forest, Seraphina was a hollow shell. The initial searing agony of the bond's severance, it had dulled to a constant throbbing ache in her soul, a wound that felt like it would never heal. And then there was the physical toll. She was cold, so cold, despite the cloying humidity of the borderlands. Hunger gnawed at her belly, a stark reminder of her vulnerability. She'd fled with nothing but the clothes on her back, her ceremonial gown, now ripped and muddied. How could this happen? How could a love so supposedly sacred, so divinely ordained, be dismissed like yesterday's scraps? No matter how hard she tried to understand, the why of it all eluded her, a slippery, tormenting fish in the dark waters of her grief. Roric's face, once her greatest comfort, was now a source of haunting pain. Elara's calculating gaze, that she understood a little better. That was malice. But Roric? He was supposed to be her other half. Because of that, the betrayal cut even deeper than the rejection itself. As the silence stretched around her, broken only by the unfamiliar rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, a new sensation began to prickle at the edges of her awareness. It wasn't just grief or hunger. It was something else, a strange buzzing under her skin, whispers. So faint at first, she thought she was imagining them, seemed to curl out from the ancient trees, from the damp earth beneath her trembling legs. Her head ached. Without warning, a vision flashing behind her eyes, a wolf, gaunt and desperate, caught in a hunter's snare, its panicked yelps echoing in her mind, as if she were there. Her breath caught. The vision, so real, so vivid, she could almost smell the metallic tang of its fear. What was happening to her? In the span of a breath, the vision faded, leaving her gasping, her heart pounding like a trapped bird. To make things worse, the whispers intensified, not in words she could understand, but in waves of raw emotion, fear, from a nearby rabbit, the ancient sorrow of a lightning-struck oak, the playful curiosity of a distant stream. Her world tilted again, this time not from sorrow, but from a terrifying, overwhelming, sensory overload. She didn't know what scared her more, the emptiness Roric had left in her soul, or these strange, intrusive feelings that threatened to swallow her whole. She felt it, clear as day. This wasn't just grief. Something inside her was breaking open, raw, and new, and utterly terrifying. Days bled into a hazy cycle. Hunger, fear, and those terrifying, intrusive sensations. And then, just as Seraphina thought she could walk no further, her legs trembling like newborn fawns, she smelled it. Wood smoke. Faint, yes, but undeniably there. A tendril of hope in the oppressive, wild air. Her body moved on instinct, pushing through a curtain of thick, thorny vines. What followed was the sight of a small, hidden encampment. Rough shelters leaned against ancient trees, and a few figures, lean and wary, moved around a central smoky fire. These were the Varjo, the outcasts, the shadowed ones. Her pack had always spoken of them with a mix of fear and contempt, like dangerous, half-mad animals. But then, what was she now? If not one of them? One of the figures, a tall she-wolf with a long, jagged scar across her muzzle, looked up. Her eyes, hard as river stones, narrowed. "Lost, little bird?" she voiced, like dry leaves skittering over rock. Seraphina swallowed, her throat dry. I have nowhere else to go." The scarred wolf, Kaelin, she later learned, watched her. For a long moment. Maybe it was fate, or perhaps Kaelin saw the same desolation in Seraphina's eyes that she herself carried. "Another one broken by pack promises, eh?" Kaelin finally grunted. "Well, don't expect soft beds here, or easy meals. You earn your keep, or you feed the forest." And so, Seraphina found a fragile, uneasy acceptance among them. She learned to forage for edible roots, to set simple snares, to stay quiet, and watch. Still. Her strange episodes, the visions, the whispers, the overwhelming empathy that would sometimes buckle her knees, didn't go unnoticed. One evening, as she gasped, clutching her head because the collective fear of a nearby deer herd fleeing a hunting panther flooded her senses, a young male Varjo backed away, his eyes wide with superstitious terror. "She's cursed! Moon-mad!" Kaelin just scowled at him. "We're all cursed one way or another, pup. Get used to it." Despite that, the fear in the young wolf's eyes, it was a fresh stab of pain for Seraphina. Even among outcasts, she was other. Would she ever truly belong anywhere? Again? As the silence stretched, punctuated by the crackle of the fire, that question haunted her, more than the hunger. From there, her life settled into a grim rhythm. Survival. Yet the whispers grew louder, the visions more frequent, more intense. One afternoon, while scouting for water, further from the Varjo camp than she usually dared, a wave of spiritual energy, cold, dark, utterly terrifying, slammed into her. It felt like the forest itself was screaming, in silent agony. Before she could move, her knees buckled, the world twisted, colors bleeding into a nauseating swirl. She pressed her hands to her temples, a desperate moan escaping her lips. This was different. This was bigger. This was wrong. What was this awful feeling? Was she dying? Or was she finally, truly, going mad? In that moment, as if summoned by her silent cry of despair, a new scent cut through the metallic tang of the spiritual disturbance. Pine, mountain stone, and a clean, wild musk that was somehow calming. A shadow fell over her. Seraphina forced her eyes open, expecting one of the Varjo, or worse, a predator. Instead, a tall figure stood there, his silhouette stark against the struggling sunlight that filtered through the canopy. He was a stranger, an alpha, by the sheer force of his presence. His eyes, a startling shade of amber, seemed to see right through her. His expression was unreadable, but there was no fear in it, only a focused intensity. Who was he? How had he found her? "You feel it too, don't you?" His voice was a deep rumble, a stark contrast to the chaos raging within her. He wasn't asking about her physical distress. She knew that instantly. He meant the screaming wrongness, in the air. Seraphina could only nod, her breath caught. He knelt beside her then, his movements fluid and powerful. "It is an old sickness in the land," he said, his amber eyes never leaving hers. "And you are a spirit walker, aren't you? One of the lost ones." Spirit walker? The term, an echo from ancient pack lore, a half-forgotten legend of wolves who could speak to the spirits, who could touch the soul of the world. It was a power revered by some, feared by many. More importantly, it sounded impossible. Yet, as he spoke the words, something deep inside her, something beyond her fear and grief, resonated. with a faint, trembling hum of recognition. Could this stranger, this powerful alpha who looked at her not with fear but with understanding, could he actually know what was happening to her? Between one breath and the next, a sliver of something that felt terrifyingly like hope pierced through her despair. Her voice trembled when she finally found it. I don't know what I am. The stranger, this alpha named Reese, as she would soon learn, offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. Perhaps, he said, it is time you found out. My pack, the Whisperwind, we remember the old ways. We remember the spirit walkers. He rose, extending a hand to her. Come with me, Seraphina of Moonclaw. There is much for you to learn, and perhaps much for you to do, because a darkness stirs that only those like you can truly face. Seraphina stared at his outstretched hand. Moonclaw, he knew who she was, which meant he might know why she was alone, in the deep woods. Could she trust him? After Roric's betrayal, trusting any alpha felt like an impossible leap. Yet, his eyes held no deceit, only a steady, assessing calm. And he had named the chaos within her, given it a shape, a history. What's worse, staying with the Varjo, as much as they offered a grim sort of camaraderie, meant a slow fade into nothingness. Her strange abilities either a growing terror or a reason for her to be cast out, yet again. So, with her heart pounding a mix of fear and that fragile new hope, she took his hand. His fingers closed around hers. Strong, warm, a lifeline. The journey to the Whisperwind territory was a blur of new sensations. The forest under Reese's guidance felt different, still wild but less threatening. He moved with an uncanny grace, as if the ancient trees themselves whispered their secrets to him. He didn't press her for details of her exile. Instead, he spoke of the balance of the world, of the spirit in all things, of the responsibilities that came with great power. It was like listening to a song her soul half remembered. And then, just as they reached a hidden pass that smelled of high mountain air and unknown herbs, a scent made her wolf stir. Moonclaw warriors. Before she could move, Reese stepped in front of her, his stance instantly shifting from calm guide to formidable alpha. 3 wolves from her old pack, their faces grim, stepped into view. The outcast, one of them, a guard named Jorn, voiced, his eyes fixing on Seraphina. Elder Elara wants her returned. Reese didn't even glance back at Seraphina. His voice, when it came, was deceptively soft, yet it vibrated with an authority that made the air crackle. She is under Whisperwind protection now. Leave. Jorn hesitated, his hand twitching towards the knife at his belt. Deep down, she knew the truth. Elara wouldn't give up easily. But then, Reese simply looked at him, a silent, unwavering stare, and Jorn and his companions, slowly, reluctantly, backed away. As they disappeared, Reese turned to her, his expression softening. The shadow blight I spoke of, Elara's fear, her need for control. They feed it, Seraphina. That is what you will learn to fight. And just like that, her path was no longer about mere survival. It was about something far bigger, far more terrifying, and perhaps far more important than she could ever have imagined. The Whisperwind territory. It felt like a different world, a place where the very air hummed, with an ancient, quiet power. And then, under Reese's patient guidance, Seraphina began to truly explore the depths, what it meant to be a spirit walker. Days were spent in focused training, not just in controlling the overwhelming flood of sensations, but in reaching out, in listening. She learned to quiet her own racing thoughts, to feel the subtle currents of the spirit world that flowed around her, like unseen rivers. One afternoon, as she sat in meditation beside a whispering waterfall, its spray like cool diamonds on her skin, she finally connected. With an ancestral spirit, the presence was vast, ancient, and surprisingly gentle. The shadow blight. It feeds on fear, on discord, on lies. It twists what is good. Look deeper, child. The rot has old roots. A vision bloomed behind her eyes then. A dark, creeping sickness, spreading through a vibrant forest. Wolves turning on each other, their eyes hollow, their spirits gone. Her breath caught. The sheer scale of the threat, the insidious nature of it. It settled upon her, like a physical weight. So, this was what Reese had meant. This was the darkness she was meant to face. How could one she-wolf, an outcast, stand against such an old and terrible power? More importantly, the vision had felt so real, so immediate. What followed was a deep aching sorrow. For the world she hadn't known was so endangered. She opened her eyes. The scent of pine and damp earth from Reese's nearby presence. A small comfort. He watched her, his amber gaze knowing. "You saw it?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Seraphina nodded, her throat tight. It's worse than I imagined." "It always is," Reese said. "But you are not alone in this, Seraphina. We, the Whisper Wind, we remember the old duties, and you have a strength you are only just beginning to understand." Despite that, doubt lingered. Could she truly be strong enough? Her own pack had cast her out, because they saw her as a weakness, a threat. What if Elara, in her twisted way, had been right? About her being dangerous. In the quiet that followed, that question and the chilling images of the Blight's corruption intertwined, creating a new knot of fear and resolve in her heart. POV, Third Person Limited, Roric. Meanwhile, back in the Moonclaw territory, a different kind of rot was spreading. Roric paced his den, the gnawing emptiness inside him, a constant, unwelcome companion since Seraphina, since she had left. He'd told himself it was for the pack. He'd told himself Elara, with her years of wisdom, knew best. But then, why did everything feel so wrong? The winter hunts had been poor, the game scarce and skittish. Sickness, a strange lethargic ailment, had swept through the lower dens, taking 2 elders and leaving pups weak. Not only that, but his wolves were on edge. Squabbles breaking out, over nothing, their tempers as sharp and brittle as ice. It wasn't like this when his father was Alpha. It wasn't like this when Seraphina was here. He slammed a fist onto his heavy oak table, crash Elara's reassurances. They were beginning to sound hollow. Her explanations for the pack's woes, a harsh winter, other predators, the natural cycle, too easy, too dismissive. Because of that, a suspicion, ugly and unwelcome, began to take root in his mind. Could Elara be wrong? Or worse, could she be deliberately misleading him? That night, he sought her out. "The pack suffers, Elara," he stated. "The hunts fail, the sickness spreads, what is happening to us?" Elara's gaze was serene, almost pitying, as if he were a child asking foolish questions. "These are trials, Roric, sent by the moon goddess to test our strength, to cull the weak. The pack will emerge stronger, leaner, as it should be, without distractions." Her mention of distractions, it felt like a pointed barb, aimed straight at the festering wound of Seraphina's absence. What's worse, her calm dismissal of his pack's suffering. It felt cold, uncaring. This wasn't the wise counsel he expected. This felt like something else, something harder, something that didn't care about the individual wolves, only about some abstract notion of strength. Was this truly the path to a stronger pack? Or was it the path to ruin? As the silence stretched, Roric felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air, a chilling premonition. That the true threat to his pack might not be the harsh winter, but the elder standing before him. Scene 4-2, POV, Third Person Limited, Seraphina. The ancestral spirit's words, "The rot has old roots. Look deeper, child," echoed in Seraphina's mind for days. And then Reese, seeing her quiet obsession, brought her to the heart of the Whisper Wind's sacred grove, a place pulsating with ancient energy. Here, surrounded by carved stones that hummed with forgotten lore, he showed her a weathered scroll, its parchment so brittle, it threatened to crumble at a touch. "Our oldest records," Rhys explained, his voice hushed. "They speak of the first Blight, and of those who colluded with it, seeking power they could not comprehend." As Seraphina carefully unrolled the scroll, her fingers tracing the faded symbols, a strange resonance pulsed through her. Her wolf stirred. The air thickened. Without warning, the symbols began to glow, with a faint, sickly light, the same unnatural luminescence from the sealed door. In her deepest fears, her breath caught, and then, the world around her, dissolved. She was standing in a shadowed clearing, centuries ago. A figure cloaked in darkness, a Moonclaw ancestor by the familiar tang of their scent, stood before a swirling vortex of pure shadow, a nascent form of the Blight. The ancestor was chanting, offering, bargaining, offering a sliver of their pack's spirit, their land's vitality, in exchange for a promised power, a dominance over other packs. And the Blight, it accepted. With a soundless, greedy inhalation, it seeped into the ancestor, into their bloodline, leaving behind a residue of its corrupting influence. And then, the vision shifted. She saw a long line of descendants, each bearing a hidden mark of that ancient pact, each struggling with a growing fear, a paranoia, a desperate need to control anything that might expose their tainted heritage or feed the shadow they carried. The final face she saw, her eyes wide with dawning horror, was Elara's. Elara, not just a manipulative elder, but an inheritor of this terrible secret, driven by generations of fear, desperately trying to suppress any power, like a spirit walker's, that might interact with the Blight her ancestor had invited in. In that moment, everything clicked into place. Elara's fear of her, Roric's rejection. It wasn't about Seraphina's imagined flaws. It was about Elara's ancient, terrifying burden. Her world tilted. The vision shattered, leaving Seraphina gasping on the floor of the sacred grove. Rhys's strong hands, steadying her. "Seraphina, what did you see?" His voice, her anchor. "Elara," she choked out, the name tasting like ash. "Her line. They made a pact. With the Blight. Long ago. She's not just misguided. She's terrified, and she's trying to contain something she can never control." The truth unraveled before her, stark and horrifying. This was so much bigger than a rejected mate. This was an ancient corruption, a betrayal at the very roots of her former pack. And Elara was at its heart, a victim and a perpetrator, all at once. The stakes, already impossibly high, had just skyrocketed into a realm she could barely comprehend. As if the world narrowed to that single terrible truth Seraphina knew. Her life had changed direction once more, this time towards a confrontation she had never asked for, but could no longer avoid. Scene 4.3, POV, Third Person Limited, Seraphina. What followed was a grim council between Seraphina and Rhys, the weight of her vision settling heavy between them. The scent of old parchment and sacred herbs in the Whisper Wind den did little to soothe the turmoil in her soul. "If Elara's lineage is tied to the Blight," Seraphina said, "then she's not just a threat to me, or even to Moonclaw. She's a conduit, a weak point, for this darkness to spread." Rhys nodded, his amber eyes dark with understanding. Her fear, her obsession with control, it creates the very discord the Blight feeds upon. We cannot stand by and watch it consume everything. Other packs must be warned. They must understand the true nature of this threat before it's too late. Deep down, she knew the truth. As much as she wanted to hide, to heal, to simply be with Rhys and the peace he offered, the knowledge she now carried was a burning coal in her hands, She couldn't drop it. More importantly, she wouldn't. Because of that, a new resolve hardened within her, chasing away the last shadows of her victimhood. "Then we warn them," she declared. "We tell them what Elara is, what she's hiding. We show them the truth of the Blight." Rhys looked at her, a flicker of something, pride, admiration, in his gaze. "It will be dangerous, Seraphina. Elara will not take kindly to her secrets being exposed. She will see you as an even greater threat." "I know." And she did. But the fear was different now. It wasn't the helpless terror of the rejected outcast. It was the sharp, focused fear of a warrior facing a known enemy. But what other choice do we have? Let the Blight win. So they began to plan, to strategize, to identify which alphas might be receptive, which ones were already too deeply mired in their own petty conflicts, or perhaps already subtly influenced by the Blight's creeping tendrils. The task felt monumental, like trying to hold back the tide, with cupped hands. POV, Third Person Limited, Roric. Meanwhile, back in the Moonclaw den, Roric's unease had festered into a cold certainty. Elara's explanations for the pack's suffering grew increasingly bizarre. Her pronouncements, more tyrannical. She spoke of purges, of rooting out disloyal elements, her eyes shining with a disturbing, fervent light. She even began to hint that Seraphina, the outcast, was somehow magically projecting misfortune upon them from afar. A ridiculous notion. Yet, it nevertheless found purchase amongst the most fearful and superstitious of the pack. To make things worse, whispers were reaching him from border patrols, whispers of a powerful she-wolf with strange abilities, sheltered by the reclusive whisper-wind alpha, whispers that sometimes chillingly named Seraphina. Could it be? Could Seraphina, the girl he had so callously dismissed, be more than he had ever imagined? That night, fueled by a desperate need for answers and a growing horror at what his pack was becoming, Roric confronted Elara again, this time before the entire council. "Enough, Elara," he roared, his alpha power, rusty from disuse in her presence, finally breaking free. "Your remedies fail, the pack weakens, and these wild accusations against an outcast, they reek of paranoia, not wisdom." Elara faced him, her serenity cracking, revealing the fanaticism beneath. "She is a threat, Roric, an uncontrolled spiritual catalyst. I did what was necessary to protect this pack, a truth your weak sentimentality refuses to grasp." "Protect us?" Roric shot back, his own fury rising. "Or protect your own secrets, Elara?" He didn't know where the words came from, only that they felt true. Her eyes narrowed, slits of pure ice. "You dare question me, boy? After all I have done for you? For this pack?" She raised her voice, addressing the council. "Our alpha grows soft. He consorts with rumors from renegades. He forgets his duty." Before either could speak further, two of Elara's most loyal guards stepped forward, their expressions hard. Roric found himself surrounded, the council members looking away, cowed by Elara's power. In that moment, he saw clearly. He had been a fool, a puppet, and Elara was a tyrant, and the pack, his pack, was in terrible danger, not from Seraphina, but from the very elder who claimed to be its staunchest protector. As the guards closed in, Roric knew. He had crossed a line. There was no return. His only thought now, escape, find the truth, whatever the cost.
The weight of what she'd seen in the sacred grove, that terrible vision of Elara's ancestor and the Blight, it settled on Seraphina like a physical cloak. And then, it became a fire in her belly. She couldn't just sit in the safety of Whisperwind territory, not while her old pack, not while all packs were at risk. Rhys, his amber eyes steady and understanding, stood with her. He knew what she had to do, even before she spoke the words. Because of that, their bond, forged in shared knowledge and growing respect, felt stronger than any faded tie she'd once believed in. "We have to warn them, Reese," she said, the scent of pine from his nearness a strange comfort, amidst her fear. "We have to tell the other alphas what Elara is, what she's truly connected to. It will be like walking into a den of hungry wolves, Seraphina," Reese cautioned, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "Elara's influence, her whispers of your danger, they will have spread like a sickness. Many will not believe. Some may even see us as the threat." "I know," she voiced, "but we have to try. If even one alpha listens, if one pack stands with us, it's a start." So they made their plans. Risky plans. They would travel first to the Stonemane pack, whose alpha, a grizzled old wolf named Boren, was known for his stubborn independence and his distrust of political maneuvering. Maybe it was fate, or just a desperate hope, but Seraphina felt he might be their best chance. As they prepared to leave, the whisper-wind wolves watched them, a mixture of fear and respect in their eyes. This was it. Her first true step as a spirit walker, not just understanding her power, but actively wielding her knowledge against the darkness. She didn't know what scared her more, the thought of failing, or the thought of what might happen if they succeeded, and Elara turned her full fury upon them. Deep down, she knew the truth. There was no turning back now. Her world had tilted, and this was the path it had set her on. With every heartbeat, the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what this lone she-wolf, once an outcast, would dare to do. Meanwhile, back in the Moonclaw den, Roric felt like a caged animal. Elara's guards, a constant presence, their eyes cold and watchful. His attempt to challenge her before the council, it had been a disaster. He'd been publicly humiliated, branded as soft, unstable. His authority systematically stripped away by the very elder who had once mentored him. What's worse, Elara now ruled Moonclaw with an iron fist, her pronouncements becoming law, her paranoia infecting every corner of the pack. Sickness still plagued the lower dens, the hunts still failing. And Elara's only answer? Stricter rationing for all but her chosen loyalists, and more fervent, disturbing rituals to cleanse the pack of weakness. No matter how hard he tried to find allies within the council, most were too afraid of Elara, too cowed by her power. Yet a few trusted warriors from his father's time met with him in secret, their faces grim. "She's destroying us, Roric," one of them, a scarred veteran named Finn, voiced. "This isn't strength. This is madness." Roric knew Finn was right. That's why he had to get out. He had to find help. He had to find Seraphina. The whispers of her presence with the Whisperwind Alpha, of her strange powers, and had become a desperate, unlikely beacon in his darkening world. Could she be the key? Could the mate he had so cruelly rejected possibly be the only one who could save them? The irony, a bitter pill. "I need to reach the Whisperwind pack," Roric said to Finn. "I need to warn them, to warn her, about what Elara is becoming." Finn nodded slowly. "It's a death sentence if you're caught, Alpha." "Staying here is a slower death for all of us," Roric countered, the gnawing emptiness inside him now mixed with a desperate burning urgency. "Elara is tightening her grip. If I don't leave soon—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew. Which meant he had to risk everything. He had to believe that Seraphina, despite what he'd done, might still hold an answer. Or at least, a different path than the one Elara was dragging them all down. As the silence stretched, the weight of his pack's suffering and his own terrible guilt pressed down on him, making his next move both terrifying and absolutely necessary. The journey to Stonemane territory. It was fraught with tension. Every rustle of leaves, every distant howl, made Seraphina's wolf press forward, her senses on high alert. Reese moved beside her, a silent, powerful presence, his calm, a counterpoint to the frantic beat of her own heart. And then, they reached the border. A stark line of ancient weathered stones. Almost immediately, they were surrounded. Stone Mane warriors, their fur the color of granite, emerged from the trees, their expressions hard, their teeth bared, in warning. "State your purpose, Whisperwind." One of them, clearly the Pack Beta, voiced, his eyes fixed on Reese. Reese stepped forward, his posture relaxed, but radiating an authority that even the aggressive Stone Mane wolves seemed to acknowledge. "We come to speak with Alpha Boren, on a matter of great urgency that affects all packs." The Beta's gaze flickered to Seraphina, a flicker of something she couldn't quite read. Suspicion? Or was it recognition? Had Elara's poison reached this far already? Before either could speak further, a booming voice echoed through the trees. "Let them pass, Calder. I'll hear what this reclusive Alpha has to say." Alpha Boren was old, his muzzle gray, his body thick with the scars of countless battles. But his eyes, a surprisingly bright blue, were sharp and assessing as they studied Seraphina and Reese in his den. The air was thick, the scent of old fur and wood smoke. Seraphina, with Reese's quiet support, told her story. She spoke of Elara, of the vision, of the ancestral pact with the shadow blight. Her voice trembling at first, then gaining strength as she laid out the horrifying truth. Boren listened, his expression unreadable, asking only a few curt questions. When she finished, the silence in the den was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire. "Elara of Moonclaw," Boren finally voiced, his gaze distant. I remember her grandmother, always a bit too keen on old, dark things." He looked at Seraphina. "And you, girl, you claim this spirit walker nonsense, and expect me to believe an elder of a rival pack is tied to this blight?" Her heart sank. Was this it? Was this how every Alpha would react? With disbelief? With suspicion? But then, Boren's eyes narrowed. "However," he continued, a new note in his voice, "my own scryers have spoken of a growing shadow in the lands, of unease among the spirits, and Moonclaw. They've been too quiet, too insular, under Elara's influence, since young Roric took the Alpha seat after his father's untimely passing. An open loop, his father's death. Something inside her shifted, hope, fragile as a new spring leaf, unfurled. I offer no warriors, not yet," Boren stated. "But I offer this, sanctuary if you need it, and I will send my own eyes and ears to Moonclaw. I will listen. But be warned, she-wolf, if you bring trouble to my borders based on a pup's fancy." He left the threat hanging. It wasn't an alliance, not yet, but it wasn't an outright rejection either. It was a sliver, a chance. And as they left Stone Mane territory, Seraphina felt Reese's hand briefly squeeze her arm. A silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't entirely alone in this. But the thought of Elara finding out they were warning other packs sent a fresh chill down her spine, because an enemy cornered was always the most dangerous. That night, under the sliver of a new moon, Roric made his move. Finn and 2 other loyalists created a diversion at the western patrol line, a staged skirmish. It drew Elara's most zealous guards away from the main dens, which meant Roric had a slim chance. His heart hammered against his ribs. Each beat, a countdown. He moved through the packlands like a ghost, sticking to the shadows, his senses straining for any sign of Elara's enforcers. He had to reach the old, forgotten hunter's trail that led out towards the Whisperwind borders. It was his only hope. He thought of Seraphina. The memory of her face, pale and shattered by his rejection, was a fresh stab of guilt. How could he have been so blind, so arrogant? He'd let Elara twist his mind, let her fears become his own. He'd broken not just a sacred bond, but the heart of the one wolf who had only ever shown him loyalty and love. This desperate flight, this insane gamble, it wasn't just for his pack, it was for her too. Atonement. A word that felt too small for the magnitude of his crime. As he neared the edge of Moonclaw territory, a scent hit him. Wolfsbane, and something else. Something metallic, and wrong. An ambush. Before he could move, figures erupted from the darkness. Not Moonclaw guards. These were different. Their eyes held a feral, unnatural gleam, their movements jerky, too fast, and their scent. It was tinged with the same faint, sickly sweetness he'd sometimes detected around Elara when she was deep in her strange meditations. Blight touched? Without thinking, his wolf surged forward, a protective instinct he hadn't felt in months. A low growl rose in his throat. He met their charge, teeth bared, a desperate prayer on his lips. He fought with the fury of a cornered alpha. But there were too many. Pain exploded in his shoulder as claws raked across his fur. He went down, snarling, snapping, but they were overwhelming him. Just like that, his desperate hope of reaching Seraphina, of warning anyone, seemed to be dying, in the dirt and blood of his own territory. As darkness threatened to claim him, one of a pair of glowing red eyes seared into his vision. He knew these eyes. He knew this wolf. It was Kale, Elara's most trusted enforcer. But he looked different, more savage, more empty. In the stillness that followed his pained grunt, as the blight-touched wolves closed in, Roric knew. This might be the end of his desperate run. Perhaps the end of everything. The meeting with Alpha Boran, though not a full success, had given Seraphina and Reese a sliver of momentum. And then, they decided to approach the Silvercrest pack next, known for their healers and their more peaceful inclinations. But as they traveled through the dense, mist-shrouded blackwood that bordered Silvercrest lands, the air grew heavy, unnaturally silent. The usual forest sounds, the chatter of squirrels, the call of birds, gone, replaced by an oppressive stillness that made the hairs on Seraphina's arms stand on end. "Something's wrong," she voiced, her hand instinctively going to the small carving of a spirit wolf Reese had given her. Reese nodded, his amber eyes scanning the shadowed trees, his body a coiled spring of readiness. "The Blight's touch. It's stronger here than I expected. Be ready." Before either could speak further, a chorus of howls erupted around them. Not the clear, challenging howls of a territorial pack. These were distorted, filled with a mindless rage and a chilling undercurrent of pain. And then, they burst from the trees. 3 large wolves, their fur matted, their eyes glowing with that same sickly, unnatural luminescence she'd seen in her vision of the Blight Pact. Their movements, jerky, their snarls, wet and ravenous. They reeked of decay and corrupted power. "Blightwalkers," Reese voiced, shoving Seraphina behind him as the first creature lunged. Her body moved on instinct. She wouldn't just hide, not anymore. As Reese met the first attacker with a roar of his own, his form shifting, blurring at the edges as his wolf fought for dominance, Seraphina focused on the other 2. She reached out with her mind, with her spirit, a desperate plea to the forest itself. "Help us." For a moment, nothing, just the savage sounds of the fight, the snapping of teeth, the thud of bodies. To make things worse, one of the Blightwalkers sidestepped Reese's second lunge and came straight for her, its red eyes fixed on her throat. A low, gurgling growl promising a swift, brutal end. Time stood still, her breath caught, but then, as if the forest watched and answered, the ancient roots of a massive oak beside her writhed. They shot out like angry serpents, ensnaring the Blightwalker's legs, yanking it off balance with a sickening crunch. The creature shrieked, a sound that was both wolf and something other. Reese, having dispatched his first opponent with a savage efficiency that spoke of long, hard battles, turned just in time to see the roots tighten. He looked at Seraphina, his eyes wide with a new level of astonishment, before he lunged to finish the ensnared creature. The air thickened, with the coppery scent of blood and the fading stench of the blight. As the silence roared back in, Seraphina sank to her knees, trembling. The power that had surged through her, leaving her drained, but strangely exhilarated. She had done that, she had called the forest, and it had answered. But then she saw Rhys. He was favoring his left side, a dark stain, spreading on his tunic. Her heart skipped. He was hurt. As if the world narrowed to his pained grunt, and the dark blood blooming on his side, Seraphina knew. The stakes had just become terrifyingly personal. Darkness, pain, the coppery tang of his own blood filled Roric's senses. And then, a boot connected with his ribs. He gasped, his vision swimming back into a blurry focus. Kale, Elara's enforcer, stood over him, his face a mask of cold triumph. Those blight-tinged red eyes glinting with malice. The other blight walkers, their forms shifting uneasily between wolf and something grotesque, circled him like hungry jackals. He was trapped, utterly. His desperate bid for freedom, for a chance to find Seraphina and warn the world about Elara, had ended here, in a bloody heap, in his own territory. "Thought you could run, little Alpha," Kyle voiced. "Thought you could defy the Elder's wisdom. She sees all. She knows all." Roric tried to push himself up, but a wave of dizziness sent him sprawling. His shoulders screamed in protest. "Elara, she's mad," he forced out. "She's destroying the pack. With this blight." Hale laughed, a dry, crackling sound that held no humor. "The blight is power, little Alpha. Power Elara understands. Power you were too weak, too sentimental, to ever wield. Seraphina, that spirit walker runt, she was your weakness. Elara merely excised it. Seraphina." Her name, even on Kale's tainted lips, sent a fresh wave of despair and fury through Roric. He had failed her. He had failed his pack. And now, he was going to die here, a forgotten traitor, while Elara continued her reign of terror. What's worse, Kale's words confirmed his deepest fear. Elara wasn't just influenced by the blight. She was actively using it. She was embracing the very darkness she claimed to be protecting them from. Maybe it was fate that he was here, about to die. A fitting end. For a fool. "Take him to the deep dens," Kale ordered the other Blightwalkers. "The Elder has plans for him, a special ritual, to show the pack what happens to those who question her vision for a stronger Moonclaw." As rough hands, their claws unnaturally sharp, hauled him to his feet, Roric felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with his injuries. A ritual? Elara's rituals had become increasingly dark, increasingly unsettling. What did she have planned for him? And what did it mean for the pack? For Seraphina, if Elara somehow knew she was still out there, growing in power. This wasn't just his point of no return. This felt like the point of no hope. As he was dragged away, his vision blurring again, the last thing he saw was Kale's triumphant, red-eyed stare, and the chilling certainty that Elara's madness was far more advanced and far more dangerous than anyone knew. The acrid scent of blight-tainted blood and Rhys's pained gasps filled the small, hidden cave where Seraphina had dragged him. And then, the makeshift bandage she'd pressed to the deep gash on his side blossomed, fresh, dark red. Panic, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, clawed at her throat. Their escape from the Blackwood ambush, a desperate, stumbling flight. The victorious cries of the Blightwalkers echoing behind them, like the laughter of mad gods. Alpha-born's neutrality. It meant nothing now. Elara's influence, or the Blight's, was clearly spreading faster than they could warn anyone. Their plan to rally the packs? It had shattered, before it even truly began. Rhys groaned, his strong body trembling. His amber eyes, usually so clear and knowing, were clouded with pain. "Seraphina," he breathed, his hand weakly reaching for hers. "I'm here, Rhys. I'm here," she voiced. "Don't talk. Save your strength." Her own strength, It felt like water, draining into barren sand. She had called the forest, yes, but it hadn't been enough. Those creatures, they were too strong, too numerous. Because of that, a chilling thought took root. What if her power, this spirit walker magic she was only just beginning to understand, wasn't enough? What if she wasn't enough? She tried to channel her energy, to coax the healing spirits of the forest into his wound, but her focus was fractured. Her mind, a whirlwind of fear and self-recrimination. The whispers of the ancestors, usually a faint comfort, were silent now, as if even they had turned away. To make things worse, every time she closed her eyes, she saw those glowing red orbs, the mindless hunger of the Blight walkers. Elara was winning. The Shadow Blight was winning. And Reese was fading. He was her anchor, her guide, the only one who truly saw her. If she lost him, no, she couldn't think it. She wouldn't. As the silence stretched, broken only by Reese's shallow breathing, Seraphina felt a despair so profound, it threatened to drown her. Her first real test as a spirit walker. And she had failed, miserably. Meanwhile, in the deepest, lightless den beneath Moonclaw territory, Roric hung suspended by his wrists, chains biting into his flesh. The air was foul, thick with the stench of stale blood, decay, and something else. That sickly, sweet, unnatural odor he now recognized as the Blight, each breath, an agony. His shoulder, a throbbing fire, his ribs screaming with every movement. Kale, his eyes glowing with that malevolent red, had ensured his comfort before leaving him to Elara. And Elara, she had visited him. Once, not to gloat, not to taunt, but to observe. Her gaze, distant, as if he were a specimen in a cage. Her quiet pronouncements about the purification of the pack and the necessary sacrifices for true strength. More terrifying than any overt threat. He had tried to reason with her, to appeal to the elder he once respected. Seraphina is not your enemy, Elara. The Blight is. Can't you see what it's doing to you? To the pack? Her laughter then, it had been a brittle, chilling sound. The Blight is a tool, foolish boy. A power to be wielded by those strong enough to understand its gifts. Seraphina, with her untamed, chaotic spirit, she would have been its feast. I merely redirected its hunger. The casual cruelty of it, the sheer madness. It had left him speechless. He thought of his pack, suffering above. He thought of Seraphina, out there alone, hunted, and he thought of his own monumental stupidity, his blindness. Because of that, a fresh wave of self-loathing washed over him. He had handed his pack, his mate, his very soul, over to this monster. He deserved this pain. He deserved this darkness. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't see a way out. Not for him. Maybe. Not for anyone. What's worse, he could feel the Blight's influence even here. In the stone. In the air. A creeping despair that sought to leech away his will to fight. His will to live. In the stillness that followed Elara's departure, only the drip of water in the oppressive darkness, and the sound of his own ragged breath, marked the passage of his agony. This was his tomb. Days blurred into a desperate vigil. Reese's fever burned, and the wound on his side, despite her best efforts with herbs and whispered pleas to any spirit that might listen, oozed a dark, unhealthy ichor. The Blight's corruption, it was tenacious. And then, as she sat beside him, her own hunger a dull ache, her spirit a frayed thread, she tried again, to reach for her power, to call upon that deep well of spirit walker magic. But something was wrong. It felt blocked, like trying to draw water from a well, sealed with a heavy stone. She pressed deeper, searching for the source of this internal resistance. What followed was a sickening lurch in her soul. An echo, faint, yet undeniable. The torn remnants of her fated bond with Roric. It was still there, a shattered, corrupted tether, and it was acting like a spiritual dam, preventing her true power, her connection with the world's soul, and perhaps even her nascent bond with Rhys, from flowing freely. The irony, a cruel, bitter twist of fate. The bond that should have been her strength, the one Roric had destroyed, was now crippling her ability to save the one wolf who had shown her true acceptance, true partnership. No, she voiced, tears of frustration and despair stinging her eyes. No, it can't be. But deep down, she knew the truth. Her past, the wound Roric had inflicted, wasn't just a memory. It was a chain. And it was killing Rhys. By inches. How could she fight an ancient evil if she couldn't even overcome the ghosts of her own broken heart? How could she sever this spiritual shackle when the very act of its breaking had nearly destroyed her? She didn't know what scared her more, the thought of the blight consuming everything, or the thought of having to face that soul-deep connection to Roric again, even to end it. Maybe it was fate, this cruel, impossible choice. As if pulled by a string of utter hopelessness, her head sank into her hands. Was this it? Was this where her journey ended? Not in a blaze of glory fighting the darkness, Wanky, but in a dark cave, watching the wolf she was beginning to love die, because she was still tied to the one who had betrayed her. In the suffocating darkness of his prison, Roric drifted, in and out of consciousness. Thirst, a torment, hunger, a hollow ache. But worse than the physical pain was the crushing weight of his failure. And then, Cale returned. Not alone this time. He was accompanied by two other blight-touched guards, their red eyes glowing in the gloom, and they dragged a struggling, whimpering packmate between them. Old Maeve, one of the pack's gentlest Omega healers. The Elder requires a component for her ritual, little Alpha, Cale voiced, a grin splitting his distorted face. A sacrifice, to consecrate the new strength of Moonclaw, and she thought, you should bear witness. Horror, stark and absolute, clawed its way through Roric's days. No! Cale, don't, she's done nothing. But Cale just laughed, that dry, empty sound, before Roric could move, before he could even scream a protest that would matter. Cale gestured. The Blightwalkers fell upon Maeve. Roric closed his eyes, a guttural roar of pure, impotent fury ripping from his throat. But he could still hear her terrified whimpers. Then a sickening, wet sound. And then, silence. A silence more terrible than any scream. When he dared to open his eyes again, Maeve was gone. Only a dark stain on the stone floor remained. Cale was watching him, his red eyes filled with a chilling amusement. Such is the price of purity, Roric. Such is the strength Elara offers. Soon, the entire pack will be reborn in the Blight's glory, and you will be the first to receive its ultimate blessing. The words, meant to terrify, instead ignited a spark. In the deepest, most broken part of Roric's soul. Not hope, not anymore. But a cold, diamond-hard rage. Elara wasn't just mad, she was a butcher, a monster hiding behind pronouncements of strength and purity. And he, Roric, had enabled her. He had stood by. He had rejected the one true good light in his life, Seraphina. For this abomination, if he was to die in this pit, if Elara was truly going to use him in some dark ritual, then he would not go as a whimpering sacrifice. He would go as an alpha who finally saw the truth. In the stillness that followed Cale's departure, a new, terrible understanding settled in Roric's bones. Elara wouldn't stop until everything pure was consumed. And he had helped light the pyre. The cave was cold, so cold. Rhys's breathing, a shallow, ragged whisper against the oppressive silence. Each breath, a tiny stab in Seraphina's heart. She had tried everything, every herb she knew, every plea to the spirits, every desperate push against the spiritual blockage within her. Nothing worked. His fever was climbing, his skin clammy beneath her touch, the Blight's poison. It was winning. And then, as if fate demanded it, she knew. She knew what she had to do. And the thought, it was a cold, terrifying dread that settled in her very bones. That broken bond with Roric, it wasn't just a hindrance. It was a conduit, a festering wound, somehow poisoning her own spirit, her ability to connect, to heal, to fight, to save Reese. She would have to confront it, to truly sever it, not just endure its broken state, but how? How did one kill a ghost that lived inside their own soul? She thought of Roric, of his betrayal. The pain was still there, a dull ache, but now it was overlaid with a new, sharper fear. What if trying to deal with that bond, to actively purge its remnants, destroyed what little strength she had left? What if it unleashed something even worse? Her wolf pressed forward in her mind, a low whine of distress. It too felt the wrongness, the spiritual contamination. Deep down she knew the truth. She was terrified. Terrified of failing Reese. Terrified of facing Roric's memory in such a profound way. Terrified of what she might become if she delved into that kind of soul magic. What if Elara had been right all along? What if her powers, if truly unleashed, were inherently destructive, tied to some darkness she didn't understand? The whispers of the ancestral spirit, they had fallen silent. Reese was slipping away. The forest outside felt heavy, burdened by the encroaching blight. All paths, they seemed to lead to despair. She was alone. Utterly, completely alone. With a dying wolf she was starting to realize meant more to her than she dared admit, and a past that held her chained. The core emotional question that had haunted her since her rejection now had an unbearable weight. After fate betrays you and your world shatters, what if you can't reclaim your power? What if you can't redefine your destiny? What if there is no love that can heal a soul this broken? In the quiet that followed, as Reese's breathing grew even fainter, Seraphina closed her eyes. All seemed lost. The Blight was out there. Elara was winning. And she was just a scared, broken she-wolf in a cold, dark cave. Time ceased to have meaning in the darkness. Hunger gnawed. Thirst burned. His wounds throbbed, with a life of their own. And then, there were the sounds. The distant, distorted howls of what he now knew were Blight walkers. The chilling, rhythmic chanting that sometimes drifted down from the upper dens, Elara's rituals, and the screams, brief, quickly silenced. More sacrifices, for her purity. His pack was dying, and he was here, helpless, waiting, for his own turn. He thought of his father, a strong, just alpha. What would he think of what Roric had allowed Moonclaw to become? The shame, a living thing, coiling in his gut, choking him. He thought of Seraphina, her bright spirit, her unwavering loyalty, the love he had crushed with his own arrogance and fear. He had been so desperate to prove himself a strong alpha, so easily swayed by Elara's whispers of power and control, that he had become the weakest of them all. He had betrayed his mate, his pack, his father's legacy, everything. For what? For Elara's mad vision of a Blight-forged strength? Maybe it was fate that he was here. Maybe this was his only path to understanding the true depth of his failure. He remembered Seraphina's face in the den that last time, the utter devastation in her eyes as he'd spoken those cold final words, the memory, a relentless tormentor. He saw now with horrifying clarity that Elara hadn't just manipulated him, she had preyed on his deepest insecurities, his desire to be seen as a powerful alpha, and she had twisted it, using his own ambition against him. He had been so focused on the appearance of strength that he had sacrificed its true essence. love, loyalty, justice. The chanting from above grew louder, more fervent. Kyle's heavy footsteps echoed in the passage outside his prison. It was time. His time. A strange sort of calm, cold and empty, settled over Roric. There was no fight left in him, no hope, only a vast barren landscape of regret. He had made his choices. He had walked willingly into Elara's darkness, and now he would pay the price. What scared him more than death, though, was the thought that his sacrifice, his end, would mean nothing, that Elara would continue, that the Blight would win, that Seraphina, if she was still out there, would eventually fall to this darkness too, and he would have done nothing to stop it. As the heavy stone door of his cell scraped open, revealing Kale's silhouetted form and those malevolent red eyes, Roric closed his own. This was it. The end of his pathetic story. All truly seemed lost. In the oppressive quiet of the cold cave, as Rhys's breath grew shallower, a tiny spark ignited within Seraphina's despair. And then, it was the faintest whisper, an echo from that ancient ancestral spirit she'd touched in the Whisperwind Grove. A bond broken by force is not truly ended, child, only corrupted. It can be unmade, remade, by will, by choice. Her eyes snapped open. Unmade, remade. Could it be that simple? That terrifyingly complex? What followed was a surge of desperate hope, so fierce it made her gasp. If she could truly sever the tainted remnants of her bond with Roric, if she could cleanse that spiritual wound, maybe, just maybe, her full power would awaken. Maybe she could save Rhys. Her body moved on instinct. She placed her trembling hands on Rhys's chest, not trying to heal his physical wound yet, but to feel their nascent connection, the one that had been struggling to form against the shadow of her past. She focused, not on the overwhelming darkness of the Blight, but on this small, fragile light between them. And then, she pictured the tangled, broken threads of her bond with Roric. Instead of recoiling from the memory, she faced it, acknowledging the pain, the betrayal, and her own survival beyond it. I am not his anymore, she voiced into the stillness of the cave. I was never just a fated mate to be discarded. I am Seraphina, a spirit walker. As if summoned by her declaration, a faint warmth began to pulse from her hands, into Rhys. His breathing, still shallow, seemed to steady. Just a fraction. It wasn't much. But it was something. A tiny shift. A possibility. Because of that, she knew what she had to do next. No matter how much it scared her, she had to find a way to complete this, to fully unmake the old, and make way for the new. Deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't just about saving Rhys. It was about reclaiming herself, fully, and finally, from the devastation Roric and Elara had wrought. POV, third person limited, Roric. The scraping sound of the stone door jerked Roric from a pain-filled stupor, and then Kale stood there, those malevolent red eyes, glinting. Time for your anointing, little alpha. This was it, Elara's ritual, his end. But then, chaos erupted from the passage beyond. Shouts, snarls, the clang of metal, though no Moonclaw wolf used steel. Kyle spun, a surprised snarl ripping from his throat. Before he could move, a figure, scarred and formidable, filled the doorway. Finn, and behind him, two other loyal Moonclaw warriors Roric had thought long lost to Elara's purges. Not today, Blightspawn, Finn voiced, his own wolf surging as he launched himself at Kale. What followed was a desperate, brutal fight. In the narrow confines, Roric, still chained but adrenaline surging through him, kicked out. Catching one of the Blight-touched guards Kale had with him off balance, he roared encouragement, his voice raw. He had to help. He had to fight, even like this. Because of that small, desperate act of defiance, Finn found an opening. his claws tearing through Kale's throat with a sickening rip. The red glow in Kale's eyes sputtered and died. Just like that, Elara's chief enforcer was gone. Moments later, Finn was cutting Roric's chains, his face grim. "We don't have much time, Alpha. Elara knows there are still those loyal to your father's memory. She's gone too far. Sacrificing packmates to the Blight, it's an abomination." Roric struggled to his feet, his body screaming, but a wild, desperate hope, something he hadn't felt in an age, clawed its way through his despair. "Seraphina," he voiced. "I have to find her. Elara." Kyle said Elara called her a spirit walker. He said she was my weakness. But I think she might be our only strength. Finn's eyes widened slightly. "The Whisper Wind Pack, then. That's where the rumors say she is. It's a long, dangerous run, Alpha, and you're in no shape." "I don't care," Roric interrupted, his gaze burning with a new, terrible resolve. "I started this. I have to try and make it right or die trying." No matter how hard she tried to push it away, he knew he owed Seraphina more than his life. As if pulled by a string of fate he himself had once tried to sever, Roric knew. His path now led towards Seraphina, not for reunion, but for atonement. Scene 7.2, POV, Third Person Limited, Seraphina. Reese was still weak, but the faint warmth Seraphina had channeled seemed to have given him a foothold against the Blight's poison. And then, her mind was clear, on what the ancestral spirit meant. The bond with Roric. It wasn't a chain she had to break alone. It was a tie that needed to be willingly, consciously unmade by both parties, if possible, or by an overwhelming act of will from one in the presence of a greater spiritual power. But where was Roric? How could she even begin? As if the forest watched and answered her silent plea, a commotion from outside their hidden cave made her wolf stir. Her instincts surged. She moved to the entrance, Reese trying to push himself up beside her despite his weakness. What she saw made her heart skip. Moonclaw warriors, but not Elara's blight-touched enforcers. These were different. And at their head, leaning heavily on a scarred warrior she vaguely recognized, was Roric. Roric, her breath caught. He looked broken, tortured. But his eyes, when they found hers across the small clearing, held none of the coldness from their last meeting. Instead, they were filled with a raw, agonizing remorse that struck her to the core. Before either could speak, Roric stumbled forward, his escort looking warily at Reese, who had managed to stand, his protective presence a shield before Seraphina despite his injury. Roric's gaze never left Seraphina. When he was a few feet away, he sank to his knees, his head bowed. "Seraphina," his whisper, thick with a pain that mirrored the agony he had inflicted on her. I have no words, no excuse. Only a lifetime of regret. For what I did. To you. To our bond. To our pack." He looked up then, his eyes swimming. "Elara. She twisted everything. She used my ambition, my fear. I was a fool. A blind, arrogant fool. And you paid the price for my weakness." The air thickened, charged with the weight of his confession. This was it. The grovel. The moment a part of her had craved, and another part had dreaded. "I heard," Kyle said, "you are a spirit walker," Roric continued. "And I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but if there is anything left of the bond I shattered, if it hinders you, if it causes you pain, I will do anything in my power, or what's left of it, to help you unmake it, to set you free, truly free, even if it destroys what little is left of me." His words, so raw, so utterly broken, resonated with the truth she had just discovered. He was offering her the key, the chance. The moment their eyes locked, a fragile, painful understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement of a shared past that needed to be laid to rest, so a new future could begin. POV, Third Person Limited, Roric. Seraphina's silence. It was a heavy weight. Roric kept his gaze on the damp earth before him, unable to meet those eyes he had once cherished, eyes he had filled with so much pain. And then he heard her voice, softer than he remembered, yet laced with a new, steely strength. "There is a way, Roric," she said. He finally dared to look up. She stood beside the whisper-wind alpha, Reese, who watched him with an unreadable, assessing gaze. But Seraphina's eyes, they held sorrow, yes, but also a strange, clear resolve. The bond, its broken remnants, they are a hindrance, a poison, to me and to others. Her gaze flickered to Reese, and Roric saw a depth of connection there that made his own chest ache with a fresh wave of loss. It was right. It was as it should be. She deserved this. "Tell me what I must do," he said. "I will do it." What followed was a ritual unlike anything he had ever known. Reese, though clearly still injured, guided them, his voice a low, resonant hum as he drew ancient symbols in the dirt around them. He spoke of choice, of will, of the spirit's power to mend what even fate had broken. He instructed Roric to focus on the bond, on the moment of its fated inception, and then on the moment of its shattering, and then to willingly, with all his heart, release it, to give it up, to offer it to the spirits, to Seraphina, for its unmaking. As Roric closed his eyes, as he delved into those painful memories, he felt it. The phantom ache of that connection, the ghost of Seraphina's presence that had haunted him. But this time, there was no arrogance, no fear, only a profound cleansing sorrow and a singular desperate wish for her freedom, for her happiness. "I release you, Seraphina. Be free, be whole." A searing pain, sharper than any physical wound, ripped through him. And then, an emptiness, but not the gnawing void of before. This was cleaner, colder, yes, but also peaceful, as if a terrible weight had been lifted. He opened his eyes. Seraphina was glowing, literally. A soft, ethereal light pulsed around her, her eyes closed, her face serene. And Reese, the whisper-wind alpha, stood beside her, his hand outstretched, palm open, not quite touching hers, yet an undeniable current of power, of pure, vibrant life, flowed between them. The air thickened with their combined essence, with the scent of pine and wildflowers, and something ancient and wild. Her wolf, his wolf. Their souls answered each other. Between one breath and the next, Roric knew. He had witnessed the forging of a true mate bond, born not of dictate, but of choice, resilience, and a love he himself had never been strong enough to cherish. And in that moment, his atonement truly began. Scene 7.3, POV, Third Person Limited, Seraphina. As the last vestiges of the broken bond with Roric dissolved, replaced by the warm, vibrant, and utterly whole connection that snapped into place with Reese, Seraphina felt a power surge through her unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was the forest, the sky, the ancestors, all singing within her. And Reese. Reese was a part of that song now. His strength a steady bass note, beneath her soaring melody. Her mark, the spiritual imprint of their true mating, tingled on her shoulder, a comforting warmth. And then, she opened her eyes, her gaze locking with his. His amber eyes, no longer just assessing or kind, now blazed, with a fierce, possessive love that mirrored her own. "It is done," Reese murmured, his hand finally closing over hers, their combined energy a palpable force. "Yes," Seraphina voiced, a radiant smile dawning on her face. The despair of the dark cave. It felt a lifetime away. She was whole, she was strong, and she was not alone. Roric stood a short distance away watching them, the pain in his eyes. now overlaid with a quiet acceptance, a profound sorrow. That was no longer just for himself. He gave a single, solemn nod. But then, there was no more time for quiet reflection. The shadow blight was still out there. Elara was still a threat. And now, Seraphina knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she could fight, that she had to. Alpha Boran said he would send word to Moonclaw to see the truth of Elara for himself, Seraphina said, turning to Reese and the assembled warriors, the few loyal Moonclaw wolves who had escaped with Roric, led by Finn, and Reese's own steadfast Whisperwind guardians. If his messengers confirm what we suspect, he might offer more than just sanctuary. And what of the other packs? Reese asked, his gaze sweeping over their small, determined force. Many will still be swayed by Elara's lies, or too fearful to act. Then we show them, Seraphina stated, her spirit walker power thrumming beneath her skin, a wild, exhilarating current. We show them the truth of the blight. We show them that Elara's strength is a corruption, and we show them that we are not afraid. Finn stepped forward. Moonclaw's heart still beats for its true alpha, Seraphina, even if they don't all know it yet. There are those who suffer under Elara, who see her madness. If they see Roric alive, if they see you fighting, some will rally. It was a desperate plan, a gamble against overwhelming odds, to march on Moonclaw, to confront Elara at the heart of her power, where the Blight's influence was likely strongest. It was madness. Yet, as Seraphina looked at Reese, his love a tangible shield around her, as she saw the grim determination in Roric's eyes, the loyalty in Finn's, the steadfast courage of the Whisperwind, she knew. This was their only path. They would be the spark. They had to be. As the sky darkened towards twilight, their small band prepared to move, the wind carrying whispers of an impending storm, both natural and supernatural. And Seraphina knew. This was the final push, before the ultimate battle, for the soul of their world.
The air before Moonclaw's central clearing crackled, thick with the stench of the blight and an unnatural, bone-chilling cold. And then, Elara stood there, no longer the composed elder, but a figure wreathed in shadow, her eyes glowing with that same sickly luminescence as the Blightwalkers, her power, a terrifying vortex, drawing on the corrupted land itself. You cannot stop this, child. The Blight offers true strength, true order. Moonclaw will be reborn. Seraphina stepped forward. Reese, a solid, warm presence at her side, their newly forged mate bond, a blazing sun within her. Her spirit walker power surged, a wild, clean river, pushing against Elara's tide of corruption. This isn't strength, Elara, she called out. It's annihilation, and we will not let you destroy our world. What followed was a battle of spirit and claw. As if summoned, the few loyal Moonclaw wolves led by Finn and the fierce Whisperwind guardians charged, engaging the blight-touched wolves Elara had twisted to her will. But the true fight was between Seraphina and Elara. Seraphina drew upon the land, upon the spirits of noble ancestors, her hands alight with pure silver energy. She pushed it out, in waves, trying to cleanse, to contain. Elara countered with blasts of shadow, thorny vines of corrupted energy erupting from the ground, lashing like whips. The very air. It seemed to scream. From the edge of the fight, Roric watched, his heart a leaden weight. He was still weak, his movements stiff, but he fought alongside Finn, his teeth tearing at the blight-touched wolves, a desperate, consuming rage fueling him. This was his fault. All of it. Elara's madness, the blight's hold. He had allowed it. And then he saw it. Elara, momentarily pushing Seraphina back with a particularly vicious blast of shadow, gathering herself for another, even larger attack, a killing blow. Seraphina was focused, her spirit locked with Elara's, but Roric could see she wouldn't be able to counter this one in time. Reese, engaged with two massive Blight walkers, trying to protect her flank. There was no one else. No one but him. His body moved on instinct, without thinking. This was it. His only chance. For atonement. For her. He launched himself forward, not as an alpha, not as a warrior, but as a shield. Just as Elara unleashed a spear of pure, consuming shadow, aimed straight at Seraphina's exposed back, Roric threw himself into its path. Pain, absolute and blinding, exploded through him. It wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, as if the Blight was trying to rip his very soul apart. But he held, he roared, a sound of pure defiance, his own alpha essence, what little remained, flaring out, to meet the darkness, to absorb it, to negate it. In that moment, as the shadow spear hurtled towards her, Seraphina felt Roric's desperate, selfless act. She felt his pain, his sacrifice, his final absolute release of any claim, any shadow, that had ever stood between her and her destiny. And then, his essence, his life force, flared like a dying star, not into the Blight, but somehow into her. A wave of pure, untainted Moonclaw alpha spirit, the spirit of his noble father, of generations of true alphas, flooded her, mingling with her spirit walker power, amplifying it, beyond anything she could have imagined. The Blight spear dissolved, against Roric's sacrifice, and Seraphina, tears streaming down her face for the alpha he should have been, for the mate he had finally truly become in this last act, rose to her full height. Her voice joined with Rhys's, a harmony of power, of love, of fierce, unyielding life. Together, they unleashed a torrent of pure, cleansing spiritual fire. It slammed into Elara, into the writhing heart of the Blight she channeled. Elara screamed, a sound that was no longer wolf nor human, as the light consumed her, as the shadows receded, as the land itself seemed to take a shuddering, relieved breath. The Blight walkers faltered, their unnatural glow dimming, then collapsed, returning to mere wolves, confused and broken, or simply dissolving into dust. As the silence roared, a true, clean silence this time, Seraphina rushed to where Roric had fallen. Rhys, at her side. The echo of battle faded, replaced by the raw, aching sound of her own grief for a future that might have been, and a profound gratitude for the sacrifice that had made their new future possible. What followed was the quiet. After a terrible storm, the oppressive weight of the Blight had lifted from the air, leaving behind a strange, fragile peace. And then, Seraphina knelt beside Roric, Rhys's strong hand on her shoulder, a steadying anchor. Roric's breathing was shallow, his eyes closed, but the terrible, soul-deep wound the Blight spear had inflicted, it seemed different. The raw alpha spirit he had unleashed had acted as a buffer, a sacrifice, but in doing so, it seemed to have also burned away some of the Blight's deepest corruption within him. He's alive, she voiced, her fingers tracing the faint pulse at his throat. Weak. So weak. But there. Rhys knelt beside them, his own weariness evident, but his amber eyes clear. His spirit fought Seraphina. He chose his end, and in doing so, perhaps, he found a new beginning. Around them, the surviving warriors, Whisperwind and the loyal Moonclaw, Finn among them, his face streaked with dirt and grief, were tending to the wounded, securing the clearing. Elara was gone, consumed by the very power she sought to wield. The Blightwalkers, no more. But the land bore scars, and so did the packs. More importantly, the immediate threat was over. Yet, the cost had been immense. As the adrenaline faded, a bone-deep exhaustion settled over Seraphina. She looked at Rhys, his love, a quiet strength that wrapped around her. They had faced the darkness, together, and they had won. But what now? How did they even begin to heal a world so deeply wounded? As the first tentative rays of dawn painted the sky, the true work, she knew, was only just beginning. Pain. That was the first thing Roric registered. A dull, throbbing landscape of it. But then, peace. A strange, quiet peace he hadn't felt since before he'd become Alpha. Before Elara's whispers had started to poison his mind. He tried to open his eyes. Heavy. So heavy. He managed a slit. Blurred figures. Seraphina's scent. Wildflowers and starlight. And something uniquely her. And Reese, the Whisperwind Alpha. His scent of pine and ancient stone. A steady presence. He remembered the Blight spear. The pain. The letting go. He had expected oblivion. Not this quiet ache, this profound weariness that felt almost clean. Seraphina. His voice, a dry whisper. Her face swam into view, her beautiful eyes filled with a sorrow that tore at him, but also something else. Not pity, not disgust. Something softer. Roric, she voiced, her hand cool on his forehead. You're awake. He tried to smile. It was likely more of a grimace. Seems so, he managed. The Blight? Elara? Gone, Reese said, his voice a quiet rumble from beside Seraphina. You bought us the time we needed, Roric. Your sacrifice, it was not in vain. Sacrifice. He hadn't thought of it that way. He'd just done what he had to. For her. For the pack he'd nearly destroyed, the last vestiges of his alpha power. They felt distant, almost gone. And yet, he didn't feel diminished. He felt lighter, as if a terrible burden he hadn't even fully realized he was carrying had finally been set down. He looked at Seraphina, truly looked at her, and saw the spirit walker she had become, the true mate, standing beside her. And there was no jealousy, no regret for what he'd lost. In that way, only a profound, aching sorrow for what he had done, and a quiet gratitude that she at least had found her path. His own path. Well, that was yet to be seen. But for the first time in a long, long time, it didn't feel like a path into darkness. In the stillness that followed, Roric closed his eyes. Not in despair, but in a weary acceptance. Whatever came next, he would face it. He had to. Weeks later, the land was beginning to breathe again. The scars remained, both on the earth and in the hearts of the survivors. But there was a new sense of purpose, a fragile hope, taking root like the first spring shoots after a harsh winter. And then, representatives from Stonemain and even a few other smaller, wary packs had come to Whisperwind, drawn by Alpha Boren's reports and the undeniable receding of the Blight's influence. Today, they were gathered in the Great Meadow, the first meeting of what Seraphina and Reese hoped would become a new inter-pack council. Seraphina stood beside Reese, their hands clasped, their mated bond a warm, steady current between them. She was no longer just Seraphina the outcast, or Seraphina the spirit walker. She was herself, whole. And with Reese, she was a leader, a healer, a guardian of the new balance. It was a heavy responsibility, but her shoulders felt strong enough to bear it, especially with him by her side. His love, his belief in her, had been the sun that had coaxed her own spirit to bloom. Her gaze found Roric. He sat a little apart from the main Moonclaw contingent, now led by a sobered Finn, who was proving to be a surprisingly steady interim leader. Roric was recovering, his physical wounds healing, though the spiritual ones, Seraphina knew, would take much longer. He was quieter now, his old arrogance gone, replaced by a thoughtful humility. He had offered no claim to leadership, had asked for nothing. He simply helped, mending fences, literally and figuratively. He met her gaze and offered a small, genuine smile, a smile that held no demand, only a quiet respect. And Seraphina, to her surprise, found she could smile back. A true, uncomplicated smile. The pain of his betrayal. It was a scar, yes, but it no longer defined her. Because of that, she could finally see him not as the alpha who had shattered her world, but as a wolf who had lost his way and was now slowly, painstakingly finding a new one, a path of atonement, and perhaps, eventually, peace. Rhys squeezed her hand. "They are listening, my heart," he voiced, his amber eyes glowing with love as he looked out at the assembled alphas and representatives. "They are ready for a new way." And Seraphina knew he was right. The fear of the Blight had broken old enmities, shattered old prides. They had a chance, a real chance, to build something better, something based on cooperation, not dominance, on wisdom, not fear. The road ahead would be long, difficult, but as she looked at Rhys, her true mate, her partner in all things, she felt not dread, but a surge of exhilarating hope. They would face it, together. As the wind shifted, carrying the scent of healing earth and new beginnings, Seraphina knew their world had not just survived the darkness, it was poised to be reborn into something stronger, something truer than ever before, and her soul answered the call.